Thank you, Ambassador Surendra Kumar, for inviting me and for your remarks, and thank you all for coming, most particularly the distinguished members of our panel. I look forward enormously to learning from them what this evening is all about. I myself was delighted to accept it because I hadn't the remotest idea what it was going to be about. The title still intrigues me. When we talk about the G20 and ask if it can be more effective than the UN, the first question that comes to mind is, effective at doing what? The G20 originated as a grouping of states with the highest per capita income and GDP to try and coordinate their policies to study the problems of the world economy. It is not an organization but a grouping, whereas the United Nations was founded as an organization with immense reach and immense responsibilities, nothing short of trying to maintain a world order. So when we are comparing the two, are we going to ask ourselves whether the G20 is going to be any more successful than the UN in creating or sustaining a world order? What do we mean then by a world order? You know, we in India, and I'm sorry to say all over the world, have mixed up the word comity to mean community of nations. Comity actually means only courtesy. And the origin of international relations was the development, principally, in fact, exclusively by the European states of the 17th century onwards, to develop a kind of set of rules and regulations for dealing with each other. But they considered themselves the civilized world. And when they talked about the Comity of Nations, it was the rules and regulations that they upheld or tried to observe in their dealings with each other. They did not apply to what they did to the uncivilized world, of which people like India were then considered part. And the greatest honor they could bestow was to admit a nation to the Comity of Nations. It did not mean community. It means that they would extend to them the rules and regulations which they were observing between themselves. In other words, there was an attempt to try and regulate international relations by some set of orderly proceedings and some set of standards to be observed by each country. Those days are fortunately gone, but that kind of world order is still very far from emerging. We saw the United Nations created at a time when we in India had just become independent, and where our own yearnings for a world order based on universal brotherhood and cooperation between nations according to international law coincided with a whiff of idealism that floated around the world in the aftermath of the great tragedies of World War II and the collapse of the earlier effort of the League of Nations to try and bring about a national or international order. Again, the realities of power have prevailed, and the United Nations, who has been for a long time in danger of becoming as ineffectual as the League of Nations was. The Indian dislike of power politics, balance of power, has always led us to believe that there is some kind of democratization of international relations which can be brought about. I must confess that I have never been able to believe it possible. Perhaps I read the wrong things as a child, but if you haven't, I would commend to all of you the Melian dialogues in Thucydides' War of Peloponnesus. it is still the most remarkable analysis of human and international relations that I know. It was the story of how the Athenians tried to persuade various smaller states of the Greek peninsula to join in their fight against, I forget, but was it Troy or was it Sparta? Thank you. And when the negotiations between the two sides was drawing to a close and the bargain was about to be struck, the delegation from Melia asked, "But what about justice?" And the Athenian replied, "My friends, you and I both know that in relations between powers, the question of justice only enters when the powers are equal. Otherwise, the strong take what they will and the weak yield what they must." That, alas, has been the only law that has been observed throughout history. And I'm afraid, whether we like it or not, under whatever garb, in whatever forms it may try to be cloaked, that will remain the essential factor of international relations. But still, within that great limitation, states are trying to evolve procedures, rules, standards of behavior. And that was what was expected from the UN. Is that what we are to expect from the G20, or should we look at the G20 primarily as an instrument for trying to bring some kind of order, not to the world as a whole, but in the economic field? I think those are the questions that came to my mind, but I'm sure our very distinguished panel has thought through much more acutely and more perspicaciously. So I look forward to hearing their explanations of this very curious question. Thank you.